2 to 4 years is what you can expect in terms of production. But if they've been fed really well, taken really good care of, had a really good nutritional program, and been maintained as healthy, they will continue to lay for a long time. And that's going to vary some breed to breed, and I'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Okay. You're going to pay more for an adult bird up front. Okay. Roughly, it's going to cost you about $8 to $10 to raise a baby chick to a full-size hen before they start laying eggs. Okay. About $8 to $10. That's by the time you factor in the feed. The chick starter is going to be a little more expensive than a layer ration. You're going to have to buy some specialized feeders and waters for baby chicks. You're going to have your heat lamp and stuff on them. You're going to have about $8 to $10 in them by the time they're mature birds. If you buy an adult hen that has already started production, and you're buying it from a producer who's got, say, $10 in that bird, they're going to sell that bird for $12 to $15 minimal. And current market price on a mature bird that's in production, a yearling hen or younger, you're going to look at paying anywhere from $15 to $20 depending on the breed for the adult bird. Okay, so your cost up front is a little bit more. Where you can buy, baby chick, you're going to spend anywhere from on the low side about $3 a piece up to $5 a piece, depending on if you're getting a rare breed or an exotic breed or something like that. So a lot of folks would prefer to buy baby chicks because they're paying less in just one great big chunk right up front, and then week by week they're buying feed, and so it's not as much of an upfront cost. Okay. The stress of a new environment, I've talked about that. The mature birds, when you move them, sometimes they'll stop production for a little while. And so if you're really excited and you've just spent $15 a piece for these yearling hens, and you brought them to your home, and there's your kids are running out every day looking in the nest box, sometimes it can be a little frustrating, and the stress of a new environment will a lot of times cause them not to lay or not to produce. Okay. If you start with chicks, one of the pros is you know how old they are when you get them. Okay. When they're this size, now you may look at that baby chick and go, well, it's somewhere between 3 and 5 days old, but there's no doubt that it's not, a year old, okay? And so it's a whole lot easier to know that you're getting young birds when you get baby chicks, okay? The other pro is it's easier to buy clean birds. And when I say clean, use the term clean birds. It's easier to know that those birds have originated from an NPIP source and they haven't been out at this point in time, they haven't been out on the ground, hopefully. They've not been out on the ground or in a brooding environment that's going to expose them to a bacterial flora. Okay? More than likely, if you're buying baby chicks, if you're getting them from a hatchery and having them mailed to you, they've come right out of the incubator, gone right into a box, gone to the post office, and they're arriving at your door, and they've not seen a human being. They saw a gloved hand real quick as they blink coming out of the incubator and going into the box. If you're buying from a local hatchery, and most of any place that you buy from will guarantee the health of that bird. Okay, they'll guarantee the health of that bird. It means if you get them home and something happens and they all die, that hatchery will stand behind what they've sold you. Okay, most of the large commercial hatcheries will replace anything that's lost in shipping. If they're not willing to do that, don't buy from them. Okay. And ask them up front, what is your refund policy? Now, obviously, if you get them home and Fido comes in and he just loves them a little too much, okay, and swallows them accidentally while he was giving them kisses, there's not a refund on that. But it's a lot easier to buy clean birds when you're buying young baby chicks, okay? It's a little more cost efficient in that you kind of have the ability to control what happens to that bird from the time that it's little up until the time that it's big. And you're not going to have the big cash expense right up front in terms of buying mature birds. Okay? You also are going to have a very low stress transition for those birds. They're going to go from baby birds in the brooder into the house that you built for them or into the coop that you built for them. They're going to hear your voice. They're going to know your voice. They're going to be familiar with their environment. There's not that stress upheaval, okay, in that process that's going to kind of interrupt them. So it's a good low stress environment because they'll be used to you. And you are the number one kind of control in their environment, okay? They'll get to know who you are every time, that's the person that feeds me, that's the person that takes care of me. I don't have to be afraid of this person. It will lower the stress a little bit. The cons, it's going to be about 20 weeks on the average before you get eggs. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
I am important is it to inject them for Merrick's?
I get that asked that question a lot. It used to not be. In Middle Tennessee and in Tennessee, Merrick's was not a big deal. Unfortunately, there are a couple of places, and I won't state any names, there are a couple of places that have Merrick's on their property here in the Middle Tennessee and extended Middle Tennessee area that have Merrick's and continue to sell birds. The state shut them down. They'll end up opening right back up. And Merrick's, as a result of real poor health management practices of a couple of farms, has become more widespread than it ever has been before. If you're not sure, okay, and here's the thing with Merrick's, if you buy a farm and maybe you don't know that there's ever been birds there and you build a coop and put it out there, if 10 years ago there was a coop there that had birds that had Merrick's, you've got Merrick's. Okay? It gets into the soil, it's impossible to abate. Okay? You can burn the poultry house down and rebuild on the same property and you're going to have Merrick's. And so if you know you're in an environment where Merrick's has been present before, it's worth asking a commercial place to vaccinate them for Merrick's. If that's not the case, if you're living in a residential area or you're starting on a farm and you're pretty confident they've never had poultry there before, then I wouldn't recommend vaccinating for Merrick's. Okay? And I'm all about vaccines if they're needed. If they're not, we don't. We don't vaccinate for Merrick's on any of our birds because we know historically we are completely clean. But if somebody's buying them, we've got a couple of customers that every year will say, I know we've got Merrick's on the property. Then we'll work really hard to make sure that they get the vaccine that they would need. Okay. And here's just another thing that I'll mention. If you go on the internet, everything that you'll read will tell you have Merrick's. Everything. Okay? The internet's the most scary place in the world to go if you're trying to figure out why your hen's got a little sneeze. Okay? You go on there and, before you know it, we get panic calls all the time because everything will direct toward the worst, most terrible, most infectious disease. Most of the poultry diseases are really easy to manage just with good sanitary practice. Okay? And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Okay? All right, drawback is going to be about 20 weeks before you have eggs, and you're going to have to brood chicks. And we've had customers that have told us, oh, it's just such a hassle. And I'm afraid I'm going to do it wrong. Brooding chicks is a pretty easy process. Okay? You need a container, whether it's a box you build out of wood. If you've got a water troughs are excellent brooders. They're real easy to transition, especially metal water troughs. Okay? Rubber water troughs, you want to make sure, in any case, where whatever you do if you're brooding chicks, you want to make sure that heat lamp is secured. Okay? We've known people who've had their houses burned down because they clamped and they thought that little clamp will do, and then as the chicks get up a little older and they fly up on the light, pull the clamp down, now you got a heat lamp sitting right on the floor of whatever container they're in, and you've got trouble. So you want to make sure and put a secondary security device, either use a C-clamp to clamp that other clamp on, or suspend it from a wire or a cable that you suspend from the ceiling. Heat lamps are the greatest threat there, but you need a heat lamp. This has got a thermometer back here. I don't recommend putting a thermometer in your brooder. Let the baby chicks tell you if they're hot or cold. And if you have something that's oblong, something like this table, to put the baby chicks in, put your heat lamp in one source, in one end, put your feed and water in the other end. It encourages them to exercise a little bit, but if you look in that pen and they are all huddled up under the heat lamp, they're cold. You lower the heat lamp down a little bit. What you want to see are those chicks mingling all back and forth. They're not huddled in one particular clump. If they're all down at the other end away from the heat lamp, it's probably too warm. You need to raise that heat lamp up. And as they get older, they'll require less supplemental heat. When they're real little, they weigh less than an ounce, and it's hard for them to generate enough body heat to stay warm on their own. That's why you need a supplemental heat source. Okay? And heat lamps work great. You just want to make sure that you secure them. Okay? But it's not a difficult process. You'll want to get a feeder, and make sure that you get a feeder. This one's got little holes in it instead of an open feeder. If you put an open plate in there, they're going to get in there, and right away they've got the scratching instinct, and there goes your $20 a bag baby chick starter all into the manure and stuff all around in the rest of the pen or in the litter that you got in the pen, and it's lost. Okay. There are gravity flow feeders. There's all types of feeders and waters, but you need to get a feeder, a waterer, and a heat lamp, and a secure environment to keep Fluffy and Fido out of them. okay? And you're going to be well on your way to brooding chicks. Depending on the time of year you get them, a lot of our production folks who are in it for egg production and for commercial egg sales will get their chicks in February and March. And the reason they do that is they will get them in so that they start laying before August. Okay, what do we know about Middle Tennessee in August? It's really hot. Okay, and if you can get your birds starting to lay before we hit those real hot, humid days in August, then they're likely going to lay through that. If they're real close to starting to lay and we hit those really hot days, a lot of times it will stall them and another 4 or 5 weeks will go by before they start producing eggs. And the reason is it's hard for them to drink enough water to stay hydrated and produce an egg. You think about the volume of an egg, that's quite a bit of water coming out of that bird. That they've got to have their available resources to put the water into the egg, or they simply won't try and make one. Okay? All right, housing transition. That means simply you're going to move them. You know, the day comes and you move them from the brooder to the outside house. And people ask me all the time, what age should they be? It really doesn't matter so much about their age as it does about the time of year you have them and what the external, what the outside temperatures are like. This year we've had a few days where it was in the 70s during the day and in the 30s at night. That's a huge temperature variation. When you move baby chicks outside and they've been in a constant temperature environment and then all of a sudden they have these huge extremes, it's going to create a little stress for them. So you can move them out, just make sure you also move a heat source out for them. You can move them out earlier as long as they can kind of stay warm. But typically, by around 4 to 6 weeks of age, baby chicks are going to be completely feathered. They are going to have, quadrupled in their size. They're going to be making their own body heat, and they're going to be able to stand a little bit wider temperature variation. So depending on when they're maturing, if you've got them, you get them in February, you probably don't want to put them outside in March without having a heat source that goes with them, because there's always the possibility of it getting down colder. This time of year, it's not a big deal. Okay, if you get your baby chicks in April, once they're 4 to 6 weeks old, you can move them outside, and they're not going to experience as much stress. Okay, due to temperature. Okay, and this is a good image of